Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for the LTA, or I guess you could say the LCS 2026 Promotion Tournament Round Number 1 overview and analysis video. I'm so excited to finally get to say that the LCS is back. We get to see who's going to be qualifying in that guest spot going into 2026, all determined by this tournament. In this first round here, we get a couple of, we get one elimination matchup, and then, upper bracket, basically semifinals. Right now, the winners of the two series at the end of this immediately get slotted into winners finals for this bracket. So a lot on the line for everybody here today. Remember, it's double elimination after the first series. So that includes DSG, of course, coming down from that guest spot and defending their title, and then the two winners from the domestic Tier 2 leagues, being Luminosity Gaming, and then, of course, Tigres over in the LRN. They get kind of they get their extra life, no matter what. They're slotted into upper bracket, if you will, whereas the two second seeds from Tier 2 that we're going to talk about in our first series have to play to even really qualify for the tournament for that top 4. So a lot on the line for basically everybody here today. If you're excited, let me know down in the comments section below. I'm so curious to know what you guys' thoughts and opinions were on these games. We've covered Tier 2 in North America, the NACL, all year long on this channel. Of course, we've covered DSG in the LTA North as well, but I'm excited to finally get to talk about some of these LRN teams that I think were quite a lot of fun to watch over the course of this year when I was going back and watching a bit of the tape. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, but without further ado, let's get into things. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover. And at the end of the video, we'll be looking at the updated bracket, talking about where teams are landing. Bit of a spoiler alert, there are some controversial topics to talk about in today's video because of one of the series at the end. This video was supposed to come out yesterday, really threw a wrench into my scheduling plans that everything had to get delayed here because, boy, are there a lot of tournaments and a lot of, videos that have to get out around this time. I hope you guys are interested in double uploads that are going to be coming later on this week, but, we'll get to that when we get to that. We're going to be covering every series equally, and that starts with the first one, basically our play-in series here, the two number 2 seeds coming in from their Tier 2 regions. If they win this series, then they are in, they get that extra life. If they lose, they are done. This is win or go home for both of these teams. It was the number 2 seed from the NACL and Conviction taking on the number 2 seed from the LRN and Estral Esports. And Estral actually picks up the win here. Not that that should be particularly surprising when you look at the roster that Conviction ends up fielding in this series. No evolved in the mid lane. Viper ends up role swapping to mid lane. Cody Sun, their substitute, ends up coming in to start in the AD carry role, and they try their absolute best to make this work and to flex things around and to try to be as flexible as possible and, do what they can. But at the end of the day, this was never really going to work out. I know a lot of people have been complaining a lot about how the tournament basically changed starting dates. Stunt, I think, was pretty vocal about, hey, like, I had a wedding to go to, and I basically had to cancel all of that in order to play in this promotion tournament. But for one reason or another, Evolved is not available for playing in this tournament, which means, again, that role swaps had to happen. Viper tried his best, I think, to play mid lane here, or at least partially played mid lane, ends up picking the Vayne, with Cody Sun picking the Orianna in game number 3, and they just don't really care about it all that much. But really just doing what needs to be done to try and get a victory. He played valiantly, but at the end of the day, Estral was too good in this series to actually end up losing it, and I think they played well. I think that there was a lot to like about the gameplay from them. This is a super team on paper and not so much in terms of execution. I think a lot of people are surprised that they're coming in as the number 2 seed and not the number 1 seed from the LRN, but this team has had its fair share of struggles, and it's not necessarily in the way that you would expect, right? You're looking at a team with a former world champion in Ghost, 2 former, Tier 1 players in North America, and even for Summit in the LCK, in Summit and Winsome, and then obviously you even have a player like Cody who's had a ton of success. Solid Snake, I think, has been a player that has caught a lot of people's eyes over the course of the last couple of years. Like, this is certainly a team that I think is stacked in terms of the talent they have at their disposal, but it really has been a lot of those high profile players that have not been all that consistent. I think Summit's not had the best split of all time. I think Ghost and Winsome have not really proven to be a dominant 2v2 in terms of how they're able to take over games. Luckily for them, it does seem like they've gotten better going into this tournament because they were pretty solid. The 2v2 in particular was really solid on the bot side. That's where Ghost is going to be getting that player of the series. I think this is up for debate. I really considered giving this to Cody and even really to Solid Snake because I think the jungle mid duo was awesome in this series. I think they did a great job, but I got to give credit to Ghost. You know, he ends up kind of carrying a lot of these games in terms of the damage, pulls out that Quadra to end the series on the Smolder. You know, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Ghost as a player. I think, you know, obviously a former world champion for Damwon and, you know, got that world championship by being basically a weak side AD carry player, by being somebody that you could put on Ashe and Jhin and just kind of, you know, let him survive and let everybody else carry the game. And I think that does kind of put the narrative into people's heads that, like, was this guy ever actually like a world-class AD carry? But Ghost was very good for a period of time. Things just kind of fell apart right around 2022, and that Nongshim Red Force team ended up being an absolute disaster. It's cool to see him at least try to get some, you know, revenge, I guess, coming back over here to North America and, you know, trying to get into Tier 1. It would be really cool as a story if he was capable of, you know, qualifying for that, and he's certainly doing his part in this series. It's not just the KDA that he's getting player of the series for. I do think he was the most relevant person on the Rift in terms of the damage output and who they were playing for. When you draft things like Smolder and even things like Sivir in game number 3, Kaisa in game number 2, when they put him on these hyper carries and they started playing for him like as a main character, things really did start working out for Estral as a team. So credit to Ghost, I thought he was great, but again, if you want to give player of the series to Cody or Solid Snake, like, how could I even really be upset by that? Cody in particular was excellent in this series, especially at the beginning. His Cassio game in game 2, certainly player of the game for that one. He was the most important player on the Rift in that second game, and his Annie setups were also very good. I even think his Galio in game number 1 was excellent, and a different game state perhaps makes that game go a tad bit differently, but I thought Cody played excellent. I've always been a really big fan of Cody. Every single time I've gotten the chance to shout him out on this channel, I have. I think he's probably the best player on this team, which I don't think a lot of people are expecting, but he came out and kind of proved that for me here in their first series. Solid Snake was also solid. I think that that's exactly what you need to see from him, even pulling out a lot of these, you know, more tanky engagers. I think that's the style that's really worked for Estral throughout this split, because you want to give resources over to other parts of this team, but when he did go to the Nocturne, it worked. Like, it actually looked really solid, and it looked really consistent. So hopefully he just becomes a more versatile jungler. I think the concern for him has always just been, okay, well, what kind of play style do we have to play around you in order to make you work? So it really does feel like that jungle mid duo is starting to click in a way that maybe it wasn't throughout other parts of the year. And then Summit and Winsome. I mean, I'm bringing them up last, but they were solid as well. Winsome was also, I would say, pretty good as a playmaker in this series. There are some things that I think he still needs to get more consistent on in terms of the mid game, in terms of applying pressure. But for the most part, how can you really be all that upset with the way that he played this? And then, of course, Summit was Summit on the top side. The Camille game in particular was good, and so was the Scion in game number 2. So credit to Estral. They end up getting into the tournament here with this play-in win, and, you know, it takes them 5 games to do it, but they still pick up the victory. For Conviction, it's obviously really tough, like, to just be in this circumstance in the first place, to be in a spot where, you know, you don't have your starting 5 and all of this kind of gets dropped on you, whether you want to blame the format, which I certainly think there's a lot of blame to go around for, or whether you want to blame Conviction as an org, you know, a streamer team that, you know, at times in the pre-tournament process, we were like, are they even going to be playing in this tournament at all? You know, there were a lot of question marks about how things were going to go down. They do end up playing, and while they aren't able to actually get in and get themselves into, you know, further best of 5s, get themselves that extra life, I do think they put up a valiant effort, and there are multiple players on this team that I really want to see in 2026 get another opportunity to potentially get a tier 1 spot. Most notably Viper, who I just think is so talented. This guy's mechanics are ridiculously good, and I think right now he's probably even better than he was when he actually was playing in the LCS in the top lane. Not to say that he's better as a mid laner or even really as an AD carry, although I think there certainly is an argument that he is a better AD carry just because of the way that that position ends up breaking down. Like, Viper's just, his confidence has soared through the roof, and his mechanical talent is very much shining through. Even played a little bit of mid lane in this series, swapped to top lane for a little bit, swapped to bot lane for a little bit. Like, we were just moving everybody around throughout this entire series because you don't really have that defined mid laner, but Viper kind of did everything he was supposed to do. He won a game on Ryze in the mid lane. It's not the easiest thing to do in the world, even with Cody playing well. So credit to Viper. I thought he was excellent throughout all of 2025, and I really do hope this is not kind of the end of the run, because the streamer team might not be coming back for 2026. But other players that I think had good years overall, and even generally good series, I think Stunt and Perry, you got to talk about in a positive light. Stunt came in and kind of revitalized the meta, I would say, in the NACL in terms of the, you know, support champion pool. Really kind of pushed away a lot of the engaged supports, although he played them, and he played them well, for a lot of those enchanters, things like Karma and Renata, that he was much more active and much more willing to bring out, even things like the Janna throughout this split. And I think that really did help Conviction a lot be able to play through a more aggressive ADC. Perry, I think, as an engager and as a macro kind of shot caller, was really positive for this team. His aggression, I think, brought a lot of, you know, really good vibes and really good tempo to this team, and he's a big reason why they're there. And TF Blade was really good, I think, throughout a majority of this year. Super exceeded my expectations. positions, even really on near airport at the beginning. Fortunately, didn't have a very good series here. He is my dud of the series going into Summit. I think he struggled to really find any sort of pressure on the map, and a lot of that split push tempo that he wanted to get with things like Aurelia and Olaf at the end of the series just didn't really land in maybe the way you were looking for. The Aurelia game was fine. I shouldn't really be criticizing that one too much, but the Olaf game, not so much. So for Conviction, it's just kind of hard. You know, I didn't really talk about Cody's son. He stepped in and was okay in this series. There were pluses and minuses. Of course, Cody's son, you know, a former top-tier NA player in the LCS, filling in as a substitute here for a bunch of friends that he probably played with a long time ago. Stunt, I believe, him and Stunt were on 100 Thieves together, if I'm not incorrect about that, many, many moons ago. But again, for Conviction, this team even being here at this tournament in the first place was already such a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. For them to get knocked out in the first round, it's not super shocking, especially with the substitute, but certainly a bit disappointing considering where they were at times in the NACL. But for Estral, I'm really happy that they were able to pick up this win, that they're moving on to round number 2. I think this is a really fun team, and obviously we'll talk about them a bit more at the end of the video. I know you're already typing your comment. I promise we're going to get to everything at the end of this video, but at least for now, like, this team is very fun to watch from a gameplay perspective. You have a lot of names here that you do kind of want to see succeed. You want to see what happens to them moving forward, and you know, this pseudo super team in the LRN that was built with the express purpose of qualifying for the LCS definitely has given themselves a shot. But now that we've got our pseudo play-in series done and dusted, it's time to get into the upper bracket semi-finals. The winners of these two series that we will cover next will immediately move on to winners finals, whereas the losers will go down to the lower part of the bracket utilizing that extra life. The first matchup we got was probably the more obvious one, at the very least on paper. It was a matchup between Luminosity Gaming and SDM Tigres, and Luminosity is going to pick up the 3-0 win. I say this is the more obvious one, not because I think that, you know, Tigres is worse than Estral. I think Estral has a lot of problems, as we've already seen. They had to be taken to 5 against Conviction, a team that was severely weakened from their actual performance in the NACL, but rather because I think Luminosity is just on fire right now. I really do believe this is the heavy favorite to be in the LCS next year and to win this tournament, and I think they came out and proved that in this series. Game 1, Game 3 in particular were just so dominant. Game 2, they should have lost, but they didn't. They ended up surviving a lot of the early onslaught coming in from SDM and being able to capitalize. Tigres couldn't really finish off that game despite having such a gigantic lead going into the back half, and Insanity really was the one to make a difference, not only in game number 2, but in game number 1 as well on the LeBlanc. He's going to get player of the series for me, although I think this is really up for debate. It's really hard when everybody on the team ends up popping off to find one player that's infinitely better than the rest in terms of how the game is played. Oftentimes you get, you know, just all-around team performances when you win this hard, but Insanity going deathless in game 1 and game 3 on the LeBlanc and the Hui, I thought was excellent. He only died twice in game number 2, despite the fact that LG was down in gold for basically the entirety of that game, and he was put in a really tough position, but he ended up stepping up and really carrying that game when they needed him the most, and that's what he's getting player of the series for. Like, he was good throughout the rest of the series. I wouldn't say he was a top 2 player in game number 3. That's probably Fake God and Tomio on the top side, who were excellent. I think he probably was the best player in game number 1, but even that's up for debate. I thought Tactical had a good game on the Kaisa. Tomio in general, even Fake God as well on the Mbessa, played really well in that game. But when you look at the entire series as a whole, do they win this 3-0 if it's not for Insanity being able to dominate in the way that he did? Probably not. And it's not just him taking over in team fights. He was able to do that, of course, on the Akali, but his laning was just unstoppable. I mean, the diff in the mid lane in terms of the 1v1 between him and Sky, like in lane, was, it's actually just disgusting to go back and rewatch. This guy is consistently up a ridiculous amount in CS and in gold and in tempo. Like, truly, he was the better player here today. He was absolutely gapping Sky in the mid lane. I think Insanity has gotten even better throughout this year. I think he was good, mostly good for the most part in the spring split regular season, and then was incredible in the finals, and then carried that over into the summer split, where he's just continued to level up. And now, you know, it's the Insanity that I was giving an all-pro vote to back in like 2023 when he was on TSM. Like, that's the version of Insanity that I think we're getting now, and that just makes me really excited to see that he can potentially hold on to this. So, you know, excited for LG, excited for Insanity. Of course, Fake God, Tomio deserve a big shout out as well. They were unbelievable in game number 3. If you want to take the recency bias part of it, then they are probably one of your player of the series here. Tomio in particular was excellent in terms of being able to shut down Mataz and what he wanted to do throughout a lot of this series. Mataz, very much a bruiser player, very much a Jarvan Wukong type of guy who wants to go in and engage, and, you know, forcing him onto these carries like Viego and Kiana that are a little bit more one-dimensional in terms of how they play the game, I think really did take away a lot of what Tigres wanted to do in this series. So credit to Tomio there. His play on the map was always excellent. He's arguably been the best player in Tier 2 throughout this year. Fake God was awesome. He's gone under the radar so much for LG on this channel in particular. I know a lot of people have given him a lot of credit, but because, you know, I do one player of the series, I don't know if Fake God's even gotten one throughout this split because his teammates are always winning so hard, and he's always the second or third best player on the Rift. But, you know, if you followed this channel for any amount of time, you know, the last couple of years, you'll know that I'm one of the biggest Fake God fans on the planet in terms of what this guy's tape has been. I've always been pushing for him to be, you know, a Tier 1 player, and, you know, it looks like he might be earning another opportunity at that here in this tournament. Tactical and Zazel were good as well. Luminosity was just better in basically every aspect, again, specifically in games 1 and 3, but even the comeback in game number 2, you got to be the better team in order to be able to make that happen, and they punched their ticket to winners finals. And then for Tigres on the other side, they just don't really have the talent, unfortunately, to be able to go up against Luminosity. They are a bit hands checked in this series. There were players that I thought played really well domestically in terms of being able to overcome their lack of notoriety and their lack of, yeah, I guess, general popularity or what people would expect of them, their name value to beat up on a team like Estral and be able to get the #1 seed from the LRN going into a tournament like this. But they just couldn't keep up in terms of the hands, like I said earlier. Sky, for me, is going to be that dud of the series. I think it was the most obvious for Sky, especially on the Aurora and the Talia, where it's just like, you can't be falling down 30 CS against Insanity in these matchups. It just becomes so difficult to play these games out when you're playing these champions that require tempo, and you're down in resources and down in gold, and obviously down in pressure by proxy. So Sky, just not a great showing, I think, in this first series here at this tournament. I think you could realistically give this to basically anyone else, though. Virus, I think, also needed to play a lot better. I think the Sivir was basically non-existent in game number 3, and that is a gigantic problem. I think there was really no way for him to be able to play out those games alongside Ichiwin down in the support position. Johnny and Mataz, like I said earlier, just completely outplayed by their opposition on the other side. Johnny is a player that I know a lot of people are hyping up because he is kind of a grinder in terms of how many games he ends up playing. You know, from a tape perspective, it's not always been perfect when it comes to the top lane for Johnny, but, you know, at least in this series, I think that there were some encouraging traits, and the 1v1 Fake God was just simply better. And then Mataz got taken off of everything that he's actually good at. Like I said, the Wukong, the Jarvan, he did get the Xin Zhao in game number 2, but even the Vi on the other side, these are the champions that I would have expected Tigres to go to a lot more consistently, and they just didn't go for that. They wanted to go for more carries coming out of the jungle position, maybe to take advantage of the fact that Tomio does like to play a lot of these more, you know, facilitative, tanky types of, you know, champions. He's a Maokai player at heart, and, you know, maybe they just felt like they could get more tempo in the jungle if they played more aggressive, but at the end of the day, they just never were going to be able to do that from a player perspective. If Virus isn't, you know, in a position, or if Sky is not in a position for them to be able to carry games, I think it's more difficult for Tigres to be able to pilot things. So overall, kind of a rough series. I would say 3-0, you know, maybe not indicative of how they played, because they should have had that game number 2, but certainly not an ideal turn of events for them. They move down to the lower bracket now, and they expend their extra life for Luminosity. They move on, like I said, to that upper bracket finals, and they will play the winner of the series that we will talk about next, likely a team that is from a similar region. And, you know, we could be getting a preview pretty quickly of what the finals of this tournament is going to look like. Luminosity, to me, are the favorites. I think even with Disguised in this tournament, I would expect Luminosity to be the best team, and right now they are living up to that. The only real question now is, are they going to be able to keep this form up for the rest of the tournament and get this organization in their first year in League of Legends into a Tier 1 spot? That's going to bring us to our third and final series of the video here, and our second of the upper bracket semifinals matchups. And it's our first series for the actual defending guest slot team, as we saw Disguised taking on Estral. And Disguised is going to pick up the 3-1 series win, but boy, is there a lot of out-of-game stuff to talk about when it comes to this series. Obviously, I have to touch upon it before we even get to anything else. This series took place over the course of 2 different days. Obviously, a lot's been going on with the League servers. The DDoS attacks have been prevalent, we'll just say, throughout the last couple of days, and there's been a lot of pauses and shutdowns and bad internet connections for, you know, remote tournaments like this. It's just been a bit of a problem. We've seen it a bit in ASI as well, with a lot of pauses and just general internet problems. When you run remote tournaments like this, you run into the risk of having, you know, true issues with the game. However, you know, I would be remiss to not mention the little blurb you have at the bottom of your screen right now, the little asterisk. Summit played the first 3 of these games, the Mbessa, the Rumble, and the Jax game, and then a big pause happened, and all of a sudden we can see on stream that he might be watching a little bit of a YouTube VOD of the game that perhaps he was in the middle of playing, and all of a sudden things get a lot more murky, a lot more dicey after that. So He is suspended for cheating. It's official. Like, he has been, at the very least, provisionally suspended for the rest of this entire tournament, regardless of what ends up happening. I'm not going to comment on this too much. It was moronic for him to do this. Like, there's no justification. I think that there are some defenses that you can give, not necessarily in terms of him looking out of VOD, but just, you know, the fact that Riot doesn't really have a lot of, strict, I guess, lockdowns for essentially what is happening. I think the team is kind of to blame a little bit for not preparing the players for a situation like this. If it was malicious, then obviously it's more than deserved, but more than likely this was just ignorance, and it sucks that you're likely going to lose your chance to even try and promote from ignorance. Not that I think Estral would have been favorites or anything like that, but it just kind of is a bad situation. He deserves to be suspended for the rest of the tournament. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that, but that's all I'm going to say about it. I feel like that's enough. You know, I've spent a minute and a half on it on the intro here. We can actually get into the games themselves now. It's pretty easy to talk about the games because honestly, at least in terms of how things broke down early on in this series, there wasn't really a ton of back and forth. TSG absolutely was the better team even before Summit ended up getting suspended for the rest of this tournament. So no real shock that they're able to come out on top when they play their, final game on a fourth day here for this video. Rahel is going to get player of the series. This to me was not a difficult decision. He dominated game one on the Lucian. He played that game basically as perfect as you can on that champion. I thought his Jinx game in game number 3 was also tremendously good. And then even the Aphelios totally fine here in game number 4. I think the fact that he was playing so aggressive and stepping up and just flashing forward to make a lot of these, forward plays, I think that is the kind of gameplay that they bring Rahel on for. When I was praising this guy and talking about him as a potential top 2 or top 380 carry in the LTA, like full stop, it's because of the mechanics and it's because of the aggressive tendencies that he was able to show on DK Challengers and on SK Gaming when he was playing over in the LEC. This was a phenomenal pickup for this team, despite the fact that I think Scary Jerry deserves a shot again in Tier 1, but I can't really fault this team for, snatching up Rahel when they had the opportunity to. Other players to play well here, XU, I thought had a great series and specifically had a great game number 4 here on the Pantheon. He's a player that I think really needs to step up in this tournament. If this team wants a chance to requalify or wants to be the favorite to requalify for that guest spot, I think a lot of that ends up landing on the shoulders of XU in the jungle, going up against someone like Tomio potentially in a big upper bracket matchup that we're going to talk about a bit later, but he played awesome in this series. He actively controlled a lot of space. He did a great job appealing for his main carry in Rahel and was creating a lot as well as an aggressive playmaker. So overall, just kind of the best version of XU that you can look for. XU has always been at his best when his laners are ahead in tempo so that he can play really aggressive on the map, and we saw that here. Rahel, Darkwing's Castle all actually had leads in their own individual matchups, which meant that XU could play more aggressive. I thought Huhi was the other player that you really have to shout out for having a great series, mostly, I shouldn't even say mostly, almost entirely for the peel that he was able to offer Rahel. This game, or this series in general, becomes a lot harder if Huhi is not playing as well as he is. I know people are very down on him as a player, but he's still one of the best supports in North American history. One of the best players in general, even after role swapping from mid to support, and I think he showcased that here on the Thresh and mostly on the Braum in game number 1, where I thought he was terrific. So for DSG, it's looking good. Castle and Darkwings, like I said, were solid enough. Certainly, not the carries of the team, but weren't the problems by any stretch of the imagination either. People expected DSG to be able to take this series easily, and they were able to do that, especially after the substitution. For Estral, this is probably the end of their hopes at this tournament, getting Summit suspended for the rest of it. It doesn't really seem like they have enough firepower to be able to recover from that. Shintalk's coming in as the new top laner is not good. He plays Annie in game number 4, and it's just a really weird way to kind of break down this comp. They send the Zed mid, they put the Olaf in the jungle, and then send the Annie top lane. I get that you want to try and get a better matchup potentially for Cody, playing the Zed into the Syndra, but man, this just did not work out. Like, I do not like the idea of this, and the Annie was entirely useless. Outside of that, unfortunately for me, Winsome is going to be the player who gets dud of the series for me. This is a hard series to play when you are exclusively playing engaged threats like the Rel and like the Nautilus and, like the Rakan and the Alistar, right? Like all 4 games, he ends up playing champions that need to go in and need to be able to get onto primary targets, and then you look at how DSG end up piloting, these comps, and the peel is better than you could ever ask for. It's some of the best we've seen from this team throughout all this year, and Winsome doesn't even really get the chance to play the game, and that's why he's getting dud of the series. I don't even necessarily think he individually played terrible, but when you play a bunch of these engagers and you never find a good engage, like, yeah, he's gonna get dud of the series. Like, that's just how things are going to break down. I think Ghost was okay. I think his positioning is still a little bit too passive for me. That's always been a bit of a problem. Rahel is probably the better AD carry of these two, and I think that very much showcased itself in this series. Cody and Solid Snake, I think, were generally fine. They're not superstars, but they were good enough. I think Cody had a couple of moments, once again, where he showcased why I think he's the best player on this team, but just wasn't really enough to be able to overcome the jungle and bot lane diff that ended up happening in this series. And, you know, for Solid Snake, he was a part of that diff in terms of not being able to generate pressure on things like Lee Sin, or I guess he got some on Lee Sin. That's probably not the game I should be complaining about. On Olaf, on Nocturne, you know, things like that. These aggressive picks that don't necessarily have a lot of backup plans. So for Estral, they move down to the lower bracket. They get their rematch with Tigres. I think best case scenario for them is they can win that and potentially get third at this tournament, but especially without Summit, it's really hard to imagine a world where this team actually lives up to the expectations of the super team that they built. And for Disguise, now the question is, can you go on and beat Luminosity Gaming? We'll preview that in just a moment at the end of this video, but I mean, it's all just about, can you be number one? It doesn't really matter if you're the second best team at this tournament. This is a nice win, but it's over a team that you should have beaten, and you lost game number 2. You know, there are a lot of question marks, I think, about DSG that hopefully they can turn around going into these final series. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS 2026 Promotion Tournament Round 1 overview and analysis video. We know our upper bracket finals of Disguised and Luminosity. We know our two teams on the lower side of this bracket with Estral and the SDM Tigres. Excited to kind of preview these matchups. Of course, talking about how this tournament breaks down, you need to get first. There's only one guest spot to be able to acquire. If you do not win this tournament, you are not going to be in Tier 1 next year. So this upper bracket finals, while it really does matter to get you into winners finals, it's not the end all be all, and it's certainly not the most important series that we are going to see at this tournament. Really, winning winners finals, all it does is mean that you don't have to get extra stage practice. You get a little bit of confidence going into that final series, but you know, we'll talk about that. I think that whoever wins between DSG and LG, you know, is in a good spot. Whoever loses, still probably in an okay spot to at least get their rematch. Obviously no bracket reset in finals, so not too much of a worry if you end up losing that series. I think right now that Luminosity looks like the best team in this tournament. I do believe that from a completeness perspective, they're just a little bit better as a team. I think their macro is better. I think the way they play the map is a bit better. I think they're better at being able to stomp out a lot of, I guess, comeback potential. Like DSG is not the most clinical in the mid game at pushing their advantages. I think LG really is, and I think a lot of their confidence will shine through. The thing for DSG is I think they have great hands with players like Rahel, with players like Castle at times that can, you know, really just kind of outplay and outskill their opponents. But I think when you go down the line, it's really hard to say that Luminosity is not even more talented than a team like DSG, maybe in every position except for AD carry, but it's not like tactical is some sort of slouch. So overall, I favor Luminosity a bit there. We'll see if that ends up, you know, progressing well. And now Estral versus Tigres. This is Estral without Summit. I think Tigres are pretty heavily favored in this series. Not only were they able to beat them before they lost Summit, but like now without them, like you're looking at a really good matchup for Tigres. And I think specifically if they're able to get more pressure out of the mid lane, if Sky can have a better series than maybe what he had against Luminosity, then I would expect this team to move forward. But if Cody just has a great day, or if perhaps, you know, Ghost and Winsome can step up and be the better bot lane out of these two, then yeah, Estral still has the talent to be able to make their way into top 3 here. I'm just not sure whoever wins this series has a chance against whoever loses against DSG and Luminosity right now. But let me know if you agree or disagree with that takedown in the comment section below. Very curious to know your thoughts and opinions down there. But that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. As a reminder, and I guess it's not even really a reminder because I haven't really posted a video since this has started, I'm casting ASI, the Asia International that's going on right now for a lot of the teams that did not make Worlds from the LCK, the LPL, and the LCP. If you are interested in checking that out, check out the links in the description to the LPL English YouTube and Twitch channel. You can subscribe or follow or whatever you'd like to do on those respective channels. I was live last night and a couple of nights ago for a first of the couple series as a color commentator, and I will be on one more time throughout this tournament, this very quick international tournament that's happening over there. So go ahead and check that out. Of course, we'll still be doing videos on that, and Worlds coverage is also right around the corner. We're going to be doing everything this year, top 20 players at Worlds, and my big primer video as per usual, where we rank every team and every player. So if you're interested in that, hit subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all